Welcome. You're listening to This Leader, the podcast. If you lead people and are seeking the transformational, high-impact secrets that will lead to greater joy and fulfillment in your work, will optimize your team performance, and will help you create a happy, highly productive workplace, then you are this leader and you're in the right place. I'm your host, Claire Laughlin, and each week my guests and I will explore the mindsets, techniques, and actionable strategies that will help you build the career, team, and organization of your dreams. Because I believe no one should have to suffer in a dysfunctional workplace. Let's get started. Hello again. This is Claire, and I'm so glad you're here. Today, we're going to talk about one of the many ways you can strive to be your best as a leader. Making an effort to be your best might seem like a luxury. After all, when there's so much to do, who has time to prioritize self-care, right? But as a leader, it's so important because in your role, you're impacting others. And your stress level is a key driver that influences your mood and therefore the impact you make on others. Remember, as a leader, making a positive impact extends your reach in a very meaningful way. So at a fundamental level, being your best is much easier when you've defined what your best really is. In fact, one of the secrets of high-impact leaders is that they generally know and talk about their values, beliefs, philosophy, and their standards, which is our topic for today. So in this episode, we'll talk about what a leadership standard is and why it's so important. And I'll share my set of standards with you. And we'll talk about how you can create and share standards for yourself that can help you be your very best. But before we dive in, I'd like to share my leadership definition again. I mentioned this in episode 1, but I think it's relevant here. I believe that anyone can be a leader and that leadership starts by learning to lead oneself. To be a leader doesn't require a title or authority. But as I mentioned a moment ago, it is really about understanding that you have an impact on others and then caring enough to make an effort to make that impact a positive one. From this perspective, we are constantly presented with opportunities to lead every day, all the time, at work, at home, in our friendships, and in our communities. But the real test of leadership comes when things get challenging, when relationships are strained, when circumstances are confusing or complicated, or when someone is behaving badly around us. These situations present the opportunity for us to make choices about how we show up. And this is where leadership truly blossoms. So think about it. For you to decide how to show up in a positive way, especially when things are hard, right? It's best to understand your own standards. We need to know who we want to be and how we want to behave. In fact, it's this commitment to being a better version of ourselves that can be our saving grace when things get really challenging. We've all been faced with situations where someone's behaving badly, and it's so tempting to just sink to their level and say the awful thing or treat them the way they're treating us. We've probably all been there and done that. But when I've done that, and of course I have, I can honestly say that I feel like I pay a big price. I lose a little of my self-respect somewhere in there because in the end, I'm letting the bad behavior or the challenging circumstance get the better of me. So a leadership standard is like a commitment we make to a set of behaviors that can help us be the best version of ourselves. And being a leader, in my book, is greatly enhanced when we have defined and can articulate our standards. Now, will our standards change over time? Yes, I would assume so. You'll hear me talk about the 5 C's of leadership today. But at one time, it was the 3 C's and then the 7 C's and the 9 C's. But I like to prioritize. So now I've landed on 5, and it may continue to change. No promises there. Let me also clarify. When I say that as a leader, you care to show up at your best and leave a positive impression, well, let's be honest. Part of that just isn't up to you. I can do my best to be connected, clear, curious, courageous, and more, but it doesn't guarantee that whoever I'm dealing with will respond in kind, nor that they'll interpret my actions in the way I intend them. So the outcome, especially in those challenging moments, doesn't always feel positive. But it's your commitment to your standards and to continuously learning and growing and improving that makes for a principled and meaningful life. So now we've talked about what leadership standards are and why they're important. So let's dig in. My leadership standards are all words. There's 5 of them that start with the letter C. And I've derived these from decades of learning about leadership, developing courses to address specific gaps that arise in organization, teaching leadership development at all levels, and working with leaders in action when they get stuck. The 5 C's are connection, clarity, curiosity, courage, and consistency. And remember, these will all be in your show notes. We'll dive deeper one by one. But first, let me just ask you to think about what would happen for you if, for example, you just became 5 to 10% more focused on developing real connection with others. So the people around you really felt your appreciation and your attentive presence a little bit more. Think about what that would be like for you, for them. Think about if these people are your kids, your family members, your trusted team members, the people you look to get things done. That could be a game changer, right? Or what if you just ensured a little greater clarity in your communication so there were fewer misunderstandings? Or what would happen if you just became a little more curious, especially in times of conflict, so you could more easily develop creative solutions to problems? And where could you express a little more courage? Where could you lean into your discomfort just a little more in service of having better relationships and delivering more value? And finally, what would happen if you became just a little more consistent, and preferably consistently positive, of course, in your relationships with others, so they would know just a little more that they can count on you? As we dig deeper into each of these, I hope you'll find a few gems, like a few small ways that you can double down and make some small improvements. These 5 C's certainly don't represent every dimension of leadership potential, but I think you'll find that they're a good start. And I can tell you, hands down, that these particular 5 standards and commitments make a tremendous difference. I have seen and felt the impact personally and organizationally when these standards are and are not upheld. So I use these standards to inform my ongoing work with leaders and as the foundation for the training programs I develop in organizations. Because many of the issues that arise in relationships with leaders can be remedied by focusing on one or more of these. Let's start with connection. Connection is about first being connected with yourself, and then it extends to being more connected with others. And connection with oneself it's all about knowing and understanding yourself in a broad sense, and also being in touch with your feelings, and your needs in a more moment to moment kind of a way. So broadly, it involves really getting to know your own personality, patterns, strengths, weaknesses, stressors, moods, feelings, and needs. And it's a lifelong pursuit. But as humans, we're generally fascinated with ourselves. So building this kind of self-knowledge can be deeply rewarding. You can build this kind of broad self-connection through insight exercises like assessments that you take, or journaling, or coaching, or therapy, or just being quiet, just sitting quietly and reflecting. And each of those strategies will give you a new perspective on how you might engage in relationships with others and with your work. Connection is also about being able to stay connected to yourself moment to moment. This means that you understand your reactions, your moods, your feelings and needs, and you can separate those from what's happening with other people. For example, imagine it's the end of a long, challenging day and you've skipped lunch and you're exhausted. You've been in back-to-back meetings. You've barely, moved from your desk. And now your staff member comes to your office to ask about a project that should have been completed 3 days ago. In fact, today you had a meeting with another manager who was complaining about your department being slow and unresponsive. So if you're not self-connected, you might already be upset with this staff member and say something that compromises that connection, like, well, gee, that was due 3 days ago. Why are you just asking about it now? What's going on? Even with a tone like that. But the more self-connected person would name their experience and use a more curious tone. It might sound like this, like, okay, let's talk this through, right? So you talk it through. And then you would add something like, let's talk about this due date. My understanding was that this was due to the other department 3 days ago. What happened? And how can we avoid it next time? right? So that's just an example. But, in the example, you're staying more connected to yourself, you're understanding and articulating your own feelings, you address the issue, and you communicate in a caring manner, maintains connection. And this is very important when it comes to leadership because leadership happens in relationship with others. So, as leaders, we need to balance our own needs and feelings and what comes up in the moment with the needs of others and do so with caring and compassion. Okay, the second C is clarity. I love that word. Clarity is essential for effective and healthy teams. I see so many teams get derailed because the leader hasn't really driven toward clarity and confirmed mutual understanding. As leaders, we need to be clear about a lot of things, right? So we need to be clear about our priorities and what matters most, because that helps everyone, including ourselves, stay focused on doing the right things. And we all know what a challenge that can be. We also need to be clear about the purpose of the work, why we're asking someone to do a project or make a change. The purpose is such an important driver, and we need to be clear about it and we need to talk about it. We need to drive toward that mutual clarity. We also need to have very clear intentions in what we're doing, and it really helps to name your intentions from the start of any given conversation. For example, in a conflict, it's very helpful to say, my intention is to clear up our misunderstanding. For example, right? Just name it. Just name your intention. Be clear and name it. And we need to try to be clear about our expectations whenever possible. If you have an expectation, try to talk about it, with the people that you're expecting to follow through, for example. Communicate those needs. So this doesn't mean, by the way, that leaders need to have all the answers. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. But it does mean that we need to spend a little extra time ensuring that there's a clear understanding between us and others. Imagine how many times it would save money. Save money, time, and energy just by taking a few minutes at the end of any conversation to confirm any decisions and agreements that have been made in that conversation. That 60 seconds can save hours of time and frustration that might come up when things don't get done as you'd expected. One additional dimension of clarity that I really want to mention is that clear leaders continuously try to separate the assumptions they're making from the facts. It's so easy to get swept into misunderstanding and stories about what's going on in any given moment when we fail to separate facts from assumptions. For example, imagine, right, that your staff member failed to deliver on a project several times. Well, it would be easy to make up a story about that staff member being lazy, and you could then begin to assume that your person is disengaged or less committed than you are. But when you focus just on the facts, you see that your staff member simply hasn't provided the material you were expecting. Okay. Now, without the big stories or assumptions at play, you can still have a very clear conversation about what's happening and how to solve the problem. You can name your expectation, you can talk about the issue, but you don't have to bog it down with additional assumptions and stories. So that's the very simple version. And I'm sure we'll do many episodes on that because it is so powerful. But being clear is in part about understanding that we make a lot of assumptions and we make up stories about people and situations in the world. And then we react to those stories that we're telling ourselves instead of just the facts. So here's what I say. This is just a tip, but this is what I say to keep myself away from that trap whenever possible. This helps me to remember to separate the facts from assumptions. I say, hey, just because you thought it doesn't make it true, Claire, right? I tell myself that all the time. Just because you thought it doesn't make it true. So striving to be clear and present in any given moment is a really important standard. So much to say about that in future episodes. So we'll come back to it. The third C is curiosity. This is such an amazing quality. It's like awe and wonder, and it's our ability to suspend belief for a moment and allow something new to emerge. As leaders, we are often called upon to have the answers, but it turns out that really exceptional leaders are generally those who Instead of offering the answers all the time, ask great questions and therefore help develop others and bring them into decisions and the thought process in a much more engaging manner. So the key here is to ask more than you tell and learn to ask powerful questions that help develop the capabilities of others. So we want fewer, why questions like, why did you do that? Right? Fewer of those and more what and how questions like, what would it take for us to get this project to completion? Or how can we move forward? In a simple sense, I practice looking forward and being solution oriented, and then formulating a question whenever possible. Curiosity is key because when we're truly curious, we're less reactive and judgmental. So people feel more welcome in our presence. They feel more free to be themselves. And we can come up with more creative solutions when we practice curiosity. So just imagine that the future is still unknown and it is unfolding before our eyes. And with some awe and wonder and curiosity and great questions, we can continue to create an amazing future. This is what I focus on to stimulate my curiosity. So here's a caveat. Of course, we also need to know when it's time to speak up and take charge and give the answers, right? But that comes fairly easily to most of us. So time and again, leaders tell me that their employees are not taking ownership and not being accountable. And this can become a real diminishing cycle because when that happens, the leader starts to give too many directives and then employees become unempowered and ownership diminishes. It's a very vicious cycle. So learning to ask better questions and express more curiosity can be the antidote. So the fourth C is courage. And this makes sense, right? As leaders, we need to be courageous. We need to say the hard thing, speak up when performance is suffering, set and hold boundaries and standards. And this can be very hard. I know that I have a strong tendency toward conflict avoidance. So this one is powerful and challenging for me. So if you need to develop more courage, I'm with you 100%. We can do it together because it's an ongoing commitment for me and it does get easier. But here's something you should know. People evaluate a leader's credibility through many lenses, but one of the most common is that leader's competence. And this doesn't mean just technical competence, but their competence in their leadership role. And many leaders are promoted into positions where they need to lead a team, but they're never trained for it. So I see a lot of leaders struggle here. And maybe this resonates for you. Because leading people is hard. But whether you as a manager or leader have had training or not, your teams are still looking to you to solve team problems and address the low performer or the negative person who's bringing the team down and take positive action. And this takes courage. Honestly, just stepping into any leadership role takes courage because it often requires us to be outside of our comfort zone and to do something different than we're accustomed to doing. So think about this one. Where can you practice just a little more courage? In which relationships? In which situations? How can you develop the resilience you need to be more courageous? Okay, so that brings us to the fifth C word, consistency. So think about this. Very few things undermine our overall sense of safety and trust quite like unpredictability. We all know this. When a person is moody or unpredictable and you never know which version of that person is going to be in the office today, it's like, I'm going to say, one of the hardest conditions. It makes it almost impossible to really thrive. It's like you can't get your footing. You never know what to expect. We've probably all encountered people like this in our lives, people who behave erratically or they're extremely needy or self-centered, or they seem to be two-faced and will tell you what you want to hear, but then do something else. Or people who gaslight you or are manipulative and you can't trust what they're going to do with the information that you share. Or there's those who take everything personally, so you have to spend your life placating them. These situations are devastating to our sense of psychological safety and will destroy trust. And without trust, we've got very little. I can't tell you how many people I've coached along the way who were living in varying degrees of this kind of toxicity, all related to that unpredictable person in their orbit. It's really tragic. So leaders, be consistent. Do what you say you will do. Say what you mean what you say, but don't say it meanly. I don't even know if that's a word, but really consider the subtle ways that you might be creating that unpredictable environment for others. Like, do you bring your mood into every room? Do you wear your feelings on your sleeve? Just be careful of those things because that really can create that sense of unpredictability for others. But generally, if you take good care of your overall well being, then emotional consistency will be much easier. We all know that when we're exhausted, overworked, and under resourced, that small things can get under our skin, and we are much more likely to have a negative reaction to something that undermines that commitment to consistency. When you focus on being consistently connected, clear, curious, and courageous, you'll start to feel your relationships reciprocating. Okay, it's your turn. What are your standards? You are, of course, free to adopt any of the ones I've laid out here, or maybe these were your standards all along, but think about what really matters to you and build your list around that. Ask yourself, like, okay, when I'm at my best, what is true? How did I get there? What is true about the way I feel? What is true about the way I treat others? How do I want to behave when things get rough? When I think about a person who I admire in hard situations, how do they behave? So free write on that for a while and see what emerges. And when you land on a few powerful standards for yourself, send me a DM on Instagram because I want to know what you're thinking. And remember, when you decide what your standards are, they become guidelines that help you make better decisions and know how to behave and interact with others, especially in challenging times. When things get hard, our leadership needs to shine. Those are the most important moments. So finally, let's talk about sharing your standards. Like, you don't have to have a system, or 5 words that all start with the same letter. And you don't have to make a big speech about your standards if you're not ready to do that. But knowing your standards and sharing them with others can help you in at least 3 powerful ways. First, it can help hold you accountable. When you declare your standards, it forces you to try harder to live up to them, and that's a good thing. Second, it can help others explain some shifts in your behavior. For example, if you want to develop a stronger habit of curiosity and ask more questions, and that's new for you, others might wonder why you're suddenly asking so many questions, and their reaction to those questions can deter your new habit. But if you say, hey, I'm really trying to develop a little more curiosity, I'm just trying to ask more questions. So if you notice me doing that, it's a good thing. And I just want to let you know why. Third, it can be a great way to ask for feedback. So if we extend the example I just gave you, you might add, hey, and I'd love to get your feedback now and then. Would you let me know if my questions are helpful? So, all 3 things are true. It can really help hold you accountable. It can help other people explain new behaviors, and it can be a great option for asking for feedback. And just making your standards known can set people at ease and smooth the transition into new ways of being. So that's a little conversation there on leadership standards. I really hope you'll dive into this and let me know what you come up with. Go forth and set or refine or revisit your own standards because it's a great way to up-level your leadership. See you next time. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. To learn more about my services and for lots of free resources and additional tools to enrich your journey, visit my website and subscribe to my newsletter at clairelaughlin.com. If you have a question about leadership, teams, or organizational culture you'd like me to address on the podcast, please reach out to me at support@clairelaughlin.com and connect with me on social channels @ClaireLaughlin Consulting. Until next time, lead the way.